Littleton City Council virtual study session for Tuesday, April 14, 2020. It is 6:30. Let's see, we have 6 council members present. Council member Driscoll is not with us yet. Well, let's see, but we do have a quorum. Assistant to the City Manager, if you could give us some instructions.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a reminder, due to COVID-19, the City of Littleton is providing virtual meeting coverage for City Council meetings and study sessions to protect the health of citizens, council members, and staff. Meetings will not be held in the community room until further notice. Options for viewing the study session are as follows. You can watch the live telecast on Comcast or CenturyLink Channel 8. You can watch live on Facebook. That's www.facebook.com/City of Littleton. Or visit littletongov.org/channel8 to watch the live stream on the city's website. Mayor?
Great, thank you very much, Sam. All right, our first item on the agenda is a financial update from the City Manager and our Director of Finance. But just a reminder to the folks out there that before COVID-19, the city was already facing some difficulties, both revenue-wise and expenses that we're expecting over the next 5 years. The City of Littleton does operate on a fairly thin margin, and for that reason, the City Council has been looking at for other possible resources for revenue, and also looking at expenses to see what we could do there. Priority-based budgeting has been one that the City Manager has put in place that has been very helpful. Much like other businesses in our community, making changes both operational and internally, it's not as simple as one would hope for. So at this point, Mark, I guess first of all, I do want to remind people that with the businesses hurting as they are right now, their revenues are down. And when their revenues are down, that affects the city because our sales tax revenue is about 78% is our general fund that comes into the city. So with the businesses hurting as they are, it certainly has a direct effect on the City of Littleton. And for that reason, the city is facing with a possible 25% less revenue collection this for the first half of the year, the first 2 quarters. And that 25% is just really just a guess. It is based on talking to other cities, other agencies. So that number could be less or it could be higher at this point. We just don't know. We really won't know until after our first quarter revenues have been accounted for, and that will be sometime late April, beginning of May. Second quarter, we'll know about second quarter, late July, sometime in August to see where we are as far as the revenues go. And next week, next week is a regular council meeting, but I do want to remind council that on the 28th, I believe it is, we are having a study session. And at the study session, we are going to be discussing the possibly what we can do to help some of the small businesses in Littleton. What the city is doing right now, they are helping them with staff. Staff is helping some of the small businesses fill out applications, find out what funds are available, both statewide and from the federal government. With that, well, we're also going to talk, I think, Mark, you were going to look into see if we have any CDBG funds or FEMA funds that could be available to help some of these small businesses, as well as one of the things we're going to discuss next study session on the 28th will be whether or not we should or could use some of the $400,000 that were being returned from our Urban Renewal Authority, which is also known as LIFT. So we're going to have that money possibly available for grants or loans, but that's what we'll be discussing. And again, that'll be on the 28th. Let's see. The City Manager and the Finance Director, they are going to give us just a broad overview, and I repeat, a broad overview of what we can expect with the loss of sales revenues over the next few months, at least the first half of the year. The presentation is not meant to be a detailed explanation of where cuts are going to be made. With that, City Manager Mark Ralph.
Right. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. So actually, that's a great introduction, Mayor. So you kind of cut to the chase of a lot of issues here. But I just, what I hope to cover here just is a broad overview, of course, of what to expect in process and in time. And some of the planning that we've kind of initiated here in the last several weeks, trying to prepare ourselves for a drop in revenue, not just sales tax. And Tiffany will be here to talk a little bit about that. And then we do want to spend a little bit of time kind of reviewing the federal legislation that's been occurring here over the last few weeks and kind of the city's outreach to our business community specifically about all that. So those are kind of three main topics. So if we just step back a second here, this really is the first opportunity to have our council together to kind of talk about this specific issue. And so for the last month or more, we have been in a real kind of state of emergency, true emergency, trying to understand this pandemic. And as we all know, that the Tri-County Health Department and other county health departments first tried to act here with a stay-at-home order. Then the governor steps in. Now, I believe that's added a lot more clarity about kind of our sense of direction here for a while. And so now we have the stay-at-home order until April 26th. Will it be extended? It's hard to say, but it's clear that it's had a pretty substantial financial impact here throughout the nation and certainly in our community. So we want to talk a little bit about what to expect here in the next couple of months. You know, last week I made a few comments here just about kind of what to expect and ultimately some of the decisions that we're going to have to make. First, myself as the city manager who's responsible for the operations of the organization, and then certainly the council's role in what I call picking up the pieces after the pandemic here to kind of realign our organization, our community, and that will come here later this summer. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So sales tax to this city is extremely important. It's a pretty common revenue stream here for cities in the state of Colorado. We are very reliant upon sales tax. Other parts of the country, other cities may have more of a reliance upon property tax. And that's just not a very common model here in our state. And so when the economy suffers, certainly our city will suffer in the revenues. And so that's what we've been trying to anticipate over the last several weeks here. Tiffany will talk a little bit about how she is taking a crystal ball look at the loss of revenue, her contact with her colleagues, certainly conversation throughout the state. I think we're all kind of waiting until this first week of May so that we can see the sales tax returns for the month of March. And I think Tiffany's prepared to kind of talk about that. So the general fund is where we have all the services and programs here that most of our citizens, our residents are accustomed to. Police, public works, the planning department, all of those are functions of the general fund. And if you look at the makeup of what is part of the budget, about 72% of that is personnel cost. And so when we talk about the magnitude of a 25% loss in revenue, and specifically to the general fund, it is a very difficult proposition for us to kind of prepare for. So this is quite honestly a historic reduction. This is going to be one of the more difficult things that probably our community will take on here for the foreseeable future. And I think that the work that we've done here is in preparation of that, and it's going to be in multiple phases. So again, we don't have the data to substantiate exactly where we're going. That won't be apparent until the first week of May. And that's why tonight, it really is not about the numbers. It's really more about what to expect and what that process may be. So the first complete set of real data here that's relative to the pandemic is the 1st of May. And then we will have a series of plans that we will implement depending on the impact of that. We've already started a series of reductions here throughout the organization to try to prepare for that. And that percentage here, in fact, it's in the staff communication. Sorry, my Siri's trying to talk to me. So in the staff communication, you know, early on here during this, just to make sure that we didn't try to control the expenditures the best we could, I've listed a few things that as the city manager, we kind of stepped into here just to kind of freeze a lot of actions. We've been in the process in the last couple of weeks, and certainly even now, trying to confirm exactly the detail of this and what is the value of that. council will see much more detailed impact of all these actions in that early May study session. May 12th, I believe, is really the date. But May is really only the first opportunity, and I'm expecting June to even be more dramatic. And so over the next several months, we're going to be going through a process similar to this, where staff is going to be sharing with you the series of sales tax reports, revenue reports, so that you can kind of see where we're going over time, and that we're fully expecting to implement a series of actions here each month. In fact, I believe that we're probably going to be in this pattern here for probably 6 months. It's probably going to take that long before we can see somewhat of a stable pattern develop, and before we can really kind of step back and perhaps try to go to a more typical business model for our city. The other thing that kind of complicates some of this as we kind of try to manage the costs is normally this time of year, staff starts the internal process here for the preparation of the 2021 budget. And so council gets involved typically in August and September with a formal adoption of the budget in October. Well, based on this kind of triage action that we're having to take for the 2020 budget, this is all going to get mixed up into some process that's yet to be defined. And so the first order of business is to try to control the expenditures here for the 2020 budget. So when you look at a 25% reduction in revenue to the general fund, that's, oh, Tiffany, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's $11 to $12 million. She's nodding.
Yes.
Yes. So $11 to $12 million is obviously a pretty substantial number, but we do not need to cut the 11 million plus all in one year. And this is what maybe the mayor kind of alluded to here a little bit. The financial kind of makeup of a city is rather complex. And so the general fund is kind of one piece that we have to look at pretty carefully, but it's really in a 5-year horizon for which we have to make sure that the actions we take today, we know and understand how that will play out over the next several years. If you look just at 1 year at a time, it doesn't tell you much of a picture, because the decisions may play into a position here that's not financially feasible in years 2, 3, or 4. And so as Tiffany and I and others kind of look at our fiscal challenge, we believe we need to come up with probably about half of that number in the year 2020 for reductions, the 5 to 6 million. And so we do have fund balance, and we do have it for a very specific purpose, or for conditions much like this, where we do have a substantial drop in revenue and that we can hopefully kind of balance out over the 5 years. And so that's why we're looking at a strategy that tries to eliminate expenditures, maybe on the magnitude of 5 to 6 million, again, if this percentage plays out. And then over each month, we look for a pattern to see how our economy is kind of responding to this. The economy is the other, obviously, wild card in all this. We obviously hope that the economy bounces back quickly. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of discussion about how we're going to be struggling with, even after the stay-at-home order is going to be lifted, what is the process for interaction among the public? How will people go to a restaurant and maintain some safe distance, the social distancing? How will we conduct even our own council meetings, boards and commissions, planning commission? So all those are still questions yet to be answered, but they are obviously going to affect us in the long run, certainly with the economy. And so I think that's another reason why we're going to have to monitor this closely and have more of a phased approach. The other reason is for kind of a phased action and looking at the data is that we do not want to overreact in the first month or the second month and make substantial cuts for which, if the economy does come back in some fashion, that we don't have the resources, the staffing to meet the demands of our public. So that's another reason why we have to be very cautious about how we approach the reductions in expenditures here. So again, the magnitude of this issue is more than simply just a reduction in some projects, some, as I call it, the reduction of pens and pencils. And ultimately, to achieve this result of 20 to 25%, we are talking about the reduction of programs, services, and staffing. And it will be at levels that will be very, very difficult and be at levels that will likely be very, very unpopular. And in order for us to just maintain the financial integrity of this organization, we just have to do it. And I think our real challenge is trying to communicate this timely to not only the staffing, the organization itself, but clearly our community. And so the challenge that lies before us is pretty substantial. The other thing too, I think is important to kind of recognize that, and I've said this before, we are in a marathon. And so we really have just begun this journey, in my opinion, and we probably will not be out of this until after some kind of a vaccine has been created and that life can go back to much more of what we saw even a few short weeks ago. So in order for us to really kind of manage something like this, we're really going to have to think and act differently in how we approach these issues. I think that this is really going to test us as leaders in our community. It's going to test others to partner with us. In fact, we'll talk a little bit more about what this could be here when Denise steps up and shares a little bit of an update. But if you think about this community over time, we stepped up to challenges before. And I think we just have a new one. And I think that we just need to recognize that our thinking of the past is not going to necessarily serve us well for what meets here, our future here. So I think that I'm challenging all of us here to kind of step up and think about how else can we do business differently in order to meet this new challenge? Because as the mayor said, we have a lot of businesses who are really suffering, and that every week that goes by just makes it more and more difficult for them to recover. So those are some just brief comments that I wanted to make. And I think this is really more of an opportunity for the council to kind of discuss and certainly ask staff some questions about how we might be approaching all of this. So with that, Mayor, I think I'll turn it back over to you.
Oh, thank you. So was Tiffany going to do a presentation of any sort, or do we want to go ahead and open up to questions?
I think I would just open it up to questions because I think there likely will lead into some issues that Tiffany can expand on.
Great. Right. Council, do you have any questions at this point?
Tiffany, can you talk about the methodology for this estimate of 25% reduction in revenues? My sense is that this is just not a known amount at this point, and I understand sort of the impulse and even the necessity to have some estimate, but is it fair to say that there's an arbitrariness to this 25% number?
Yes, I would actually say that. I think the hardest part of trying to understand the financial impact is the unknown right now. We know what percentage of restaurants are in our city related to sales tax revenues. We know how much is retail, and trying to really understand what that true impact is. Restaurants have been closed for about 2 months in March. They're going to be closed pretty much all through April. And then, we don't know what May. So we can kind of get an idea of what the immediate impact might be over the next 3 months. But I think it's the future that we're not certain about. I feel like this is going to change our whole retail model in the city. We don't know how many businesses are going to be able to continue after all of this. And so trying to understand what our future impacts, 2021, 2022, and after that is really the hardest part of that. We always talk about a new norm. And I think this truly is going to be something that's new. And what is that normal going to look like after this? So for 2020, we're estimating about 25% reduction. And it's purely based on, kind of talking with businesses and colleagues of my own, just trying to understand what our sales tax makeup is. I kind of have it kind of on a hump right now, if you will. We're going to take a pretty dip in probably April, May, and into June. with it maybe coming back up a little bit after that. But really the hardest part of this is truly the unknown piece of it. I feel you're right, 25% may be too little and it may be too much, but until we start getting the data in and really understanding what our sales tax revenues are looking like, we just don't have a clear answer at this point.
Okay. Is that it, Scott? Okay, Karina.
Thanks. So on the other side of that is when you start thinking about the cuts and the methodology of how you will discern what programs are impacted, what is going to be kind of the guiding principles of what is cut, or maybe another way to put it is what doesn't get cut. So what are some of the guiding principles that you're using on beginning to make those decisions?
Well, I think, one thing we're looking at it, we're looking towards priority-based budgeting to really understand where programs lie in that process of evaluation based on council guidelines and community needs. And so we're definitely looking towards that to understand, how impactful are these things going to be to the community and internally as well. I think some of the other things that we're looking at is, being incremental and being strategic in how we do that. Looking towards the future on maybe a worst case scenario versus current, and what we can do currently to be impactful. Take a multitude of things. And as we get more data over the next few months, I think that's going to truly dictate what steps we might take. And I'm sure Mark can probably add a little bit to that as well.
Yeah, if I may, Mayor, just, I think the priority-based budgeting is, certainly something that I've been advocating for some time. I obviously never envisioned that we'd be using it in this fashion at this moment in time, but it does, in my opinion, provide a much more kind of sound decision-making process for us to really understand, where are the city's priorities, and really how do they line up with the community's goals. We spent a lot of time here in the last couple of years taking the results, quite honestly, of the comp plan process and taking the values that our community has kind of highlighted and trying to line those up with the programs and services. And that's how we scored these things. I'm not necessarily a big advocate of simply just saying 5, 10, 20% cuts across all departments. I think that that is very unproductive. I think that that is not necessarily the best way for us to kind of manage a crisis like this. And so I do believe the methodology of priority-based budgeting is probably the best place for us to start.
Great. All right. Thank you, Mark. Pam, did you have any questions? And we can get back we're going to go around the loop here. Pam, do you have a question at this point?
No, I don't.
All right. Carol?
Based on what you said there, Mark, about the comp plan, brought that up. Where does all of that work fall into the priorities with the cutbacks?
Well, actually, the next topic on the agenda, I think after we have this financial discussion, I think the work plan discussion will make a lot more sense. And I think just maybe I'm kind of cutting to the chase of the next agenda item, but clearly, the triage work here now that we're going to have to deal with the financial status of the city is just going to preempt a lot of the priorities of the work plan. And I think that we're actually, the intent here this evening on the work plan is just to reaffirm with the council that this still makes sense, even in the light of the COVID-19 issue.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Kelly, do you have a question at this time?
Oh, excuse me. I have two questions. One is, Mark, you said there is federal legislation still being discussed and hammered out for targeting local governments. Do you have any idea when that legislation might be approved and rolled out?
Well, let's see. And, Mayor, if at some point here, I would like to have Denise Stevens just share a little bit about the update on the federal legislation and some of the work we're doing. So maybe that question's a good lead in for this particular opportunity, if you're okay with that.
Sure. Then we can come back to Kelly and Karina. I know you have another question.
I do.
So Denise, you might talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing trying to keep up with the federal legislation, first of all, and kind of what the summary of that, and then of course some of your work.
Okay, maybe I'll start with the federal relief programs because I think that's what everybody's really focusing their attention on. And we are having to kind of look at things daily. In fact, right before we started into this meeting, I got an update about what the SBA is going to do in terms of the economic injury disaster loan program. So basically what's happening is they're trying to make this easier. They're trying to streamline the process. They're trying to make people aware of the 2 or 3 different options that they have. So I'm going to give you just a briefing on the main things that people are able to apply for. So probably the most notable one is the economic injury disaster loan. And that is a loan that is available. There's $2 million in the pot for this, and it allows you to use working capital, paid sick leave, payroll, buying materials, rents, and so forth. Now, these are loans made by banks, guaranteed by the SBA. The beauty of this loan is that it has a 30-year fixed rate. So the interest rate is a bit higher, 3.75 for small businesses and 2.75 for nonprofits. But
Denise, if I can interrupt, I do want to, for the record, let everybody know that Councilman Driscoll has arrived.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry about that, everybody.
No problem. So then the other thing that is most common that people are applying for right now is the payroll or paycheck protection program. And this program rolled out mainly to try and help protect existing employees or allow businesses to rehire employees. So you're allowed to cover payroll costs, interest on mortgages, rent, and utilities. This is a 1% on the unforgivable portion and a 2-year fixed rate. So 2.5 average monthly payroll for prior 12 months or monthly expenses. But there has been a recent update, and that for those who've already laid off employees, you can still apply for these loans, and they will determine the amount of the advance based on your employees pre-disaster. So as of January 31st, 2020, they'll look at who your employees were at that time and what that payroll amount is, and that's how they'll gauge the money that they'll give you. The other thing is that if anyone has a prior relationship with a lender through the SBA, and the SBA doesn't generally loan money, they guarantee loan funds that go through banks. But if, let's say, you've had an experience where you've got a 7A loan or other types of SBA loans, then you can apply for a bridge loan, access up to $25,000 with less paperwork. And what will happen is you'll get that money quicker and easier, but then it will need to be repaid through whatever funds you get with the economic injury disaster loan. So that's another nice kind of gap fund that you can apply for. The other thing, the other main program, and this is the 4th of the federal program, is the Small Business Debt Relief Program. Now, this applies to typical SBA loans, 7A, 504, microloans, and so forth. They are automatically going to pay the principal, interest, and fees of all of these loans. So if you have these loans out there, maybe you got one to purchase additional equipment and that sort of thing, the SBA is going to go ahead and forgive all of those things for a period of time. So they will also forgive these things, principal, interest, and fees for any new 7A, 504, or micro loans. So this doesn't apply to those other 2 funds, but it is a real saving grace for anybody who has other SBA loans. Then one other program, the CARES Act does have a process by which they're going to provide $150 billion in funds to various government agencies. Now, the qualifier is 500,000 or more in population. And the list already says that Jefferson County and Arapahoe County can submit to be certified and they qualify. And we had an email exchange with Arapahoe County and Jefferson County indicating that we are hoping that they will apply for these funds. They confirmed that they are going to, and they will be meeting with various city managers and municipalities to talk about disbursement of those funds. Those funds can be used for anything in relationship to expenditures that are incurred due to this public health emergency. And they haven't nailed down the details of that, but they will let us know. And we're going to keep on the counties about getting us whatever share of that we can have. And then finally, in terms of state programs, we are working with the South Metro Enterprise Zone. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Enterprise Zone. Littleton has a relatively large enterprise zone, and we worked with Darren Hollingsworth at Inglewood to submit an application to the State Office of Economic Development. And what we asked for was that program to allow any donations made to assist businesses. And normally this is just for nonprofits, but anyone can make a donation to the fund and it's completely tax deductible. So they approved that program yesterday, and we're going to begin work with Inglewood on how we let people know about that and solicit donations from businesses and individuals that are financially positioned to do so. So I don't know if that's clear as mud. Those are some complicated programs, but what we've done is we've created a business resource list that is constantly updated, and we send it out and we make it available on gotolittleton.com and the city site. Plus, we've had training, and we can help walk people through these various applications, which we've been doing. So that information is updated on a daily basis. So anytime there's a new term added or a new improvement over the application process, it's updated and made available to the public.
Great. Thank you, Denise. Scott, I know you have a question. We're going to come back to Kelly, then we're going to go to Karina. Scott?
Yeah, I don't want to hijack the agenda. Obviously, we need to talk about our work plan, and I understand how important it is that we do that. But just apropos of Denise's discussion about relief programming, I suppose this is a question for the mayor and city manager and probably city attorney as well. We're talking about having this discussion regarding the LIFT funds being used potentially for some kind of small business grant program in the city on the 28th. It seems like we're all here now. Maybe we ought to talk about it. And I mean, here's what I'm thinking, right? I'm hearing phrases like true emergency, and we're very reliant on sales tax, and this is a historic reduction, and we don't know how many businesses will be able to continue. If we have an opportunity to keep some of our local businesses operating by acting sooner rather than later, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do it. And I think I don't want us to find ourselves in this ironic position where we're doing the very important work over many months of trying to protect the character of downtown, but we're leaving a bunch of businesses to potentially become vacant storefronts in that same sort of treasured part of our city that in so many ways we rely on as an economic driver. I expect that if we are agile and we get a grant program together, it could potentially make the difference to a lot of these businesses. In 2 weeks right now, that's crucial time. Thoughts?
Yeah, if we could at this, let's go ahead and complete our current agenda, and then maybe at the end we can discuss our strategy where we're going to go with potential grants or business loans. So if we could, Kelly, I think you had a question. You are on mute. There we go. Thanks, Scott.
It's just a thought. I know we're in kind of crisis mode right now, but and I know you're in close contact with our sister cities and all, but related to some of the other states in the country that are kind of formulating plans on how to reopen businesses are sort of taking the lead on that. Are we doing that with other surrounding communities? Having those discussions? Yeah.
Mark?
Make sure I wasn't muted there. Yeah, we've started a lot of that discussion. I think now that we have obviously a little stability through the governor on stay-at-home order, I think a lot of the discussion here is the state is trying to decide, what's next when we do open. What does that look like over time? I think too, one of the things that Denise and I just started to talk about, and I just shared with the mayor later today, is I am considering some kind of a economic recovery task force that other cities have kind of looked at, a kind of a similar model. I think it's a way for us to try to have a level of engagement here, not only just by the council as political leaders, but also business leaders and store owners that have a way to kind of communicate among ourselves with us, probably over at least this next year, to try to understand how is the federal legislation hitting the target? What can the city do? What are the things that the strategies that perhaps we need to consider here over time? And I think that this is probably something that's going to be pretty important pretty quick, because I think the landscape is going to change very rapidly. And so I think that is, I'm sorry, I haven't had really much opportunity here to kind of share this with all the council, but it's some of our recent thinking. So your question, Kelly, is yes, a lot of us are thinking about kind of the next steps and what is it we're going to need to do to kind of step up and provide, quite honestly, in my opinion, kind of a level of leadership here that's just going to be absolutely necessary to get past all this.
Great, thank you, Mark. And I don't see Carol on the screen, so I don't know if she has a question or not, but Crane, I think you were next up.
Thank you. Denise, on the programs that you are helping with now, as far as identifying all the resources available, to what degree do you have a sense of how many Littleton businesses have been able to take advantage of these? How many have reached out to you? And like, are people getting these resources? Is there something we can do more of to ensure that they're getting to them? I did have a good conversation with Pat Donahue last night, and he did share with me that the paycheck program was actually quite simple. So as long as you submit for it, it's not an overly complicated process. It really truly is accessible to many businesses. So I just wanted to gauge your sense of how successful are some of these programs specifically for our Littleton business community?
Okay, well, that's a great question, and it's kind of one that's challenging to answer. But one of the things that we're doing right now is we launched a gift card program, and it begins with a survey, kind of like we started in terms of putting businesses on the map and on the list as to being open and what they offer. And we are sending this out regularly, and we delete the people that have already responded, so we're not hitting people over and over. But to give you an idea, we just started this on April 6th and looked at the results today. And I'm going to just give you the straight up statistics. 51 out of 53 respondents are seeing declining sales, and the average percent of declining sales is 73%. 33 out of 53 have laid off or furloughed employees, but 44 out of 53 have applied for one or more of these loans. Now, think of yourself as a business person. You're not going to call up your local government and say, I applied for the loan and here's what I got. But we did see on the news that Craig Jones with Angelo's was awarded $400,000 for his 4 businesses. So he put in the application and has received a response. So that's a good sign to me that somebody who has a much larger payroll has gotten an answer. So I'm assuming that they're keeping up with things. Also, Kathleen was able to contact First Bank, and First Bank is working their way through 15,000 applications. Now that's Denver metro wide. So, but they're working 24/7 to keep up with the demand, and they think they're doing pretty well at answering these loan applications. So those are all really good signs. We are constantly letting the business community know through our communication mediums how these opportunities continue to live and how to proceed through them. So other than just contacting businesses individually, which we are doing as a staff, we're not getting any responses back other than, yes, we've applied.
Mark, I have a question. Getting back to Scott's concern about the timing of when we can get information as a council together and out. Would it be possible, or should we consider a special meeting where we would get together and discuss how else we can help our local businesses?
Well, I think staff has done a fair amount of research on what other cities have been doing here when it comes to their own kind of grant or loan programs. So my opinion, we probably could draft something for council consideration pretty quick, if that's your intent. We don't, Tiffany may have to correct me here, but I don't believe we actually have the lift funds in hand, but that's not an obstacle either. The city can front the cost of whatever you want to do and just repay the city back on the lift funds when they do come in. So I think bottom line is, I think if the council wants to consider something, we can act on that pretty quick. In my opinion, I probably could even develop it here yet this week. We could even put it on the agenda. We have a regular meeting next week, and we could put it under general business for council discussion if you feel that there's that kind of sense of urgency about it.
Well, Mark, may I add something on that too?
Yes.
We have, with Mark's encouragement, done a lot of research on what other cities are doing in terms of city business relief. So we have a lot of particulars, and if this is the direction you all decide to go in, we could launch this very quickly. We can launch it with a very easy to fill out form. We're going to follow suit with the federal government and the state. We're going to rely on people's authentic certification of their information. We already have a grant advisory committee that would be poised to make decisions about these applications. So we're pretty much set up to move forward if that is what council decides to do.
Mark, here's what I would suggest then. Maybe we could have a study session after our next regular meeting. We could talk about some of the different available sources, like I said, FEMA, the CDBG funds, and other sources. Denise she's talking some real money available through the feds. We want to make sure that the funds that our businesses get are helpful, not just a small Band-Aid. So maybe at a special meeting, it would still be a special meeting, a study session after our regular meeting next week. We can give you direction at that point.
Actually, I think that's a great idea because our regular meeting for next week is relatively short. So I think that's probably the best suggestion.
Okay, why don't we go that route? And that moves it up a week, Scott. So I think that'll be helpful for all of us. Gives staff a chance to really give some comprehensive information for us all. Let's see, Pam.
I was just thinking, as part of that information, we don't want to look at this in isolation, but how the other programs may be effective. I think we kind of want to take a bit of a strategic approach, which is what you're already doing, as you explained earlier. So if we use this funds for this, or all of it or part of it, how does that impact what other programs might be effective? So it's not done in isolation.
Well, yeah, that's a really good observation. And what I will tell you is that one of the things we could integrate into any kind of application for local funding would be just provide evidence of other loans that you've applied for. Because if they've applied for and have been approved, then they've already been vetted. Plus, we might also be able to find out what amount they've been approved for, so we could see, okay, this business has been vetted, is getting a loan, is probably viable. Therefore, any local funding might be additional and also helpful.
Great.
Well, and I think that's a great idea, Denise. What I'm saying for, what I'm looking at for is let's look at it from a holistic approach. And if that money comes in from Lyft, and how could that be apportioned, or what else will we have to cut in order to use that money for this loans, all that
Oh,
are.
understood.
Yeah, 400,000, if it goes to lift, that's something else is not going to get funding, that's for sure. And now, Tyler, I still don't have Carol Fay on my screen, so I'm assuming she's still there.
I can see her.
I can't see her.
She's,
Yeah. So, yeah, so Carol, you're going to have to chime in if you have, do you have a question at this time, Carol?
Yeah, and it has something, well, I'll just go ahead. Denise, how are we going to be certain that the companies or the businesses that apply for our little bit of money, $400,000, I believe is the extent of it? No. Let me ask this question first. I have two questions. Number one,
Okay.
for this lift money we're talking about giving to businesses, how is that all of the money we're talking about taking from city funds to dole out, or is there more?
Yeah, are you asking me, Carol?
Or whoever
Well,
maybe
there's
it's Mark more than you.
yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I think it's my understanding that's the maximum the council was looking at was the lift funds. You don't obviously necessarily use. You could look at something less than that. I think when you see some of the data that we've collected as staff, what other cities are doing, you can obviously make your own judgment about how much we might want to dedicate for this purpose. The other thing that's perhaps obvious here is that, you know, staff had anticipated taking the lift funds and putting it into the general fund and the overall balancing here for expenditures. And so I realize there's kind of this push and pull issue here, but in the end, I think if this is something council wants to do, I certainly would support that and we'd make that happen. Okay,
then we get to my original question, which is first with a statement. I'm sure that $400,000 was in the thinking of Mark and the rest of staff when you were thinking of 25% cutback. You certainly consider that 400,000. What are we not going to be able to do as a city if we give this money to businesses?
Mark, if we could, Carol, if we could hold off for Mark, if you could come back to us next week with a very comprehensive plan on what will get money and what won't get money, because I think Carol's asking a very good question, but off the top of your head, I'm not sure if you can answer that. Maybe you can. Well,
I would like to have it answered now because we've put out on the table the urgency of giving the money to businesses. And I would like to hear now about what we won't be able to do if we do that.
It's a legitimate question. I mean, we're going to have to.
Wait a minute. I want Mark to address that, not Scott.
I'm not going to address it, Carol. I'm just going to echo that I think it's a legitimate request.
Mark,
if we can just add, Scott, I think let Scott go ahead and add on. Are you piggybacking her question?
He's contradicting my question.
No, we'll get back to it.
No, I'm not contradicting the question.
Go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
I think that it's a legitimate request, and I think we need to be positioned next week to have as three-dimensional a conversation about this as possible. So I certainly share Carol's desire to have that information, and I'd like to add something related when it can be my turn again.
Okay, well, can we come back to you then at that point? Let's go ahead and let Mark, if you want to address Carol's point.
Yeah, I think the short answer is I cannot answer that. You know, what is the trade-off today? I think that's something that we might be better prepared to talk about, say, next week at a study session.
I appreciate that. I kind of thought that it's a pretty important question. I think Pam was alluding to that as well. Scott, you had a second part?
Yeah, I'm just always suspicious of round numbers, and anytime I see a grant amount for like 5,000 or something like that, I wonder how targeted it really is. I don't know if a week is enough time for Denise's department to maybe survey some businesses and see what level of grant funding might be, actually very useful to their businesses.
Yeah, that's a good point. Karina?
I actually was going to ask about surveying some businesses between now and then to really understand what their needs are, if and how a grant could solve for some of those needs, or if they're looking for something else. Again, I've reached out to a couple of business owners, and they're, I'll speak to my conversation with Pat again to say where his head is and some of his conversations with other business owners is even more future looking to say, when we open up, how does the city help us open up quickly, stronger, more effective? So it would be good, Denise, if you can get some feedback from some key businesses or people in the community to really help inform what a solution, some solutions could look like. And if it was a grant, what does that need to look like? Because one of the challenges we'll face is, what are the guidelines that we're going to use to decide who gets it and who doesn't? And we're going to have a very finite amount of money, and how far can that really go? So I think it's incredibly critical that we do hear from the business community.
And we can certainly do that. And we'll start that even starting tomorrow. We can add that into the current survey that's going out. That isn't a problem at all.
Can you share that with us?
Sorry, Carol, go ahead.
Can you share that with us, Denise, so that as we're reaching out to businesses as well, we can ask some of those questions through some of the formal conversations? Thank you.
And we'll try to do this on two levels. We'll try to do it through some mass communication so we can get more answers, but I'll probably divide my team up and we'll just make some calls specifically to business owners to see if we can get more detailed information. So we may have some face-to-face conversations with people that would yield more details, and then we may have some mass communication that would be of lesser detail, but we can get some information.
Good. Mark, what I would hope for is maybe if we do our study session after our regular meeting next week, you can give us at least a start on what we can do or not do, and then and we can still use that following week as a study session if we need to give some direction at that time. But it doesn't have to be given next week. But at least we do need information. I think, as Karina and others have mentioned, that we need more information from the folks, what really will be helpful to them. Kelly has a question, then Pam.
Just a quick one. So we're looking at like a minimum of 2 weeks before anything rolls out to the small businesses in the community.
Could be.
Any way to expedite that quicker?
The staff needs, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think staff needs time to get some information together. I mean, if we can address it next Tuesday, we'll see where we go from there. But at the very least, we'll have a study session where we can make some direction, finalize some direction. These are complicated things. We just can't say, we're going to give out money. This is the city's, this money belongs to taxpayers, so we want to make sure we do it right. Pam.
2 points. One thing is, I don't want to get complicated, but is this a grant or this a loan or some mixture? And you might come up with some scenarios and recommend. I don't want to get complicated. And second thing is, just in terms of timing, having gone through just updating a grant program on historical preservation work, not from scratch. It doesn't happen overnight. I mean, we'd love to think it would. It just takes some time to dot the I's and cross the T's. And even if you have a prototype, my experience, if Denise or whoever's team worked, like, you just have to have some criteria that makes sense. And it doesn't happen right away. So that's my experience with grants.
Thank you.
Well, and if I may say, that's a totally legitimate observation. And we do have an awful lot of criteria from other cities, but that's also something we can bring to you guys, and we can kind of hash out what you want to do if you decide to move forward.
Great, thank you. Scott?
Never mind, Denise addressed it perfectly.
Okay, thank you. Patrick?
Hey, yes, are we still planning opening up on the 27th? I mean, is that still where the state is and where Zilton going to follow the state?
Yes, that is, as of today, that's the current date is to open. There's been a lot of conversation at the state level providing local governments, businesses, some guidelines about what that would look like. In fact, I think there's the conference call on Friday here relative to some of that. So that is the direction. Every day is an adventure, so I don't know what it will look like on the 20th.
And we're going to follow the state, Mark, or are we going to? Is that our plan?
Yeah, we would follow the state.
Okay.
Yeah, we're looking to, the governor's made a stay-at-home order here. It's no Tri-County Health steps in to try to help us maybe interpret some of the state's order. They intercede on our behalf, but we're truly looking to the governor's office.
Okay.
Great. All right. Thank you, Patrick. And Mark, Council, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think right now some direction we're giving you is to go out and at least do a study for us to see what is being done and what resources are available already and how we're already helping. And then in addition to that, what else can the city itself do, possibly do, if anything? So that, Council, if that's not correct, just chime in now.
It sounds like, Mark, we would be able to give staff direction next week if we wanted to, that you feel like staff can get sufficient information in front of council.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think so. I think you could give us direction. I'd want to sit down not only with staff, but with Reed, City Attorney's Office here, kind of looking what the formal action might be, what's necessary to implement. But I think from my perspective, what council's asking for is very doable here by next week.
Okay, yeah, information is what we're looking for. And as Scott just said, it's perhaps we could end up doing direction. Karina?
Very quick, Denise, the program that you're doing with Inglewood where donations can be accepted for an enterprise zone.
Yes.
How is so I just want to understand that better. How does after they get the money, how does that get disseminated? Under what basis is that that money disseminated?
Yeah,
and you can answer it. Hold on, and you can answer it in an email. I just want to understand better.
That's what I was going to ask, because it's a little more complicated than what she could probably give us right now. But I think that's good information for you to have, though. That's for sure.
Well, if you don't mind, it's actually a fairly simple answer. If you don't mind, I mean, we discussed it. We
follow
discussed
in an email too.
Okay, I will. But we discussed this with Inglewood, who is our administrator, our regional administrator. And so when we reach out for donations, we're going to make it clear that those donations, anything that's earmarked for Littleton, it will be collected by Inglewood, by the administration of the enterprise zone, but then it will be dispersed directly to us to use as we see fit. And this might be another method by which we can give grant funds to businesses that would be
within the zone.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's information that council could use, is where is the zone, the boundaries, and all that kind of good stuff.
I will. Yes, I'll send that out because I do have a map and I can show you.
That would be good. Do we have anything else on this subject? And by the way, if I keep seeing Karina keeps freezing up once in a while, so Scott, if I freeze up, man, be ready to go, buddy.
Okay, sure.
May I add one last thing that is kind of good news?
Oh, nice, please.
We are always engaged in business attraction campaigns, but on the 31st of March, we gathered information from a couple of different data sources indicating what food retailers are expanding in Colorado. And we created a pretty sophisticated flyer and we sent it out to about 1,288 site selectors that represent 536 businesses. And within days, we heard affirmative, we're interested in Littleton from Starbucks, Mavericks, Pilot Flying J's, Charlie's, all the Dunkin' brands, Safeway, Chipotle, and Qdoba. And some of these are already talking to our existing developers. So even though this is going on, we still have our hands on trying to get businesses to consider sites in Littleton. And it looks very positive.
That's excellent. Thank you, Denise. The council, if we're ready to move on, let's move on.
Jerry, may I interrupt you? You have a hand up from Carol.
Oh, Carol?
My hand has been up for a really long time.
You're not always on my screen, so I don't know that.
Oh, I don't know that I'm not on your screen. I coming from the point of view as the city as a potential lender or a grantor, I think we have the responsibility, and I want to ask Denise if she can implement this, to make sure that the people the companies that we give or loan money to, number one, have the ability to stay in business long enough to use the money wisely, to actually generate tax income for us, number one. And number two, that they actually need it. Because we have a number of business people in Littleton who frequently flaunt how rich they are and how very successful their businesses are. And it wouldn't make sense to give them more money when we have other needs.
Yeah, hopefully that's gonna be part of what you put together, Denise and Mark, qualifications.
Yes, that will definitely be part of it. And I totally understand what Carol's asking. That was one of the things we were struggling with, because obviously we don't want to loan or grant money to a business that's on its way out, which also kind of leads into what Karina was talking about. Maybe this is something we want to consider a little bit later in this process, because those businesses that are still alive after a certain period of time might be more sustainable.
Yeah, if they're going to die in 2 weeks, they are not in good condition.
Correct.
Great, thank you very much. And any other questions before we move on then?
Yeah, Jerry, could something be done by Tyler or someone else, some other of our skilled staff, to make sure that you can see my hand?
Yeah, that's a question I have. I think that's a technical thing we're gonna have to work out for our next meeting. Yeah, I think we will. All right, well, if we can go ahead and move on to our next item, which is going to be the work plan update from Mark. Again, you have a presentation as well. And council, as you know, this is going to be about our goals and objectives in the budget, about how what we did in January is not necessarily applicable now. So I'll turn it over to Mark.
Yeah, just a quick introduction here. And so under normal circumstances, we would have a workshop retreat first of the year. Council would identify your goals and objectives, and then staff would follow up with kind of the action steps that might be necessary to implement those objectives and goals. The study session like today, this moment in time, would normally be an opportunity to kind of reaffirm all that. And then the council would actually formally adopt the goals and objectives at the next regular meeting. Obviously, we're not in a normal circumstance. And so we're here to kind of update you on the staff's thinking about the goals and objectives relative now to COVID-19. And as I kind of alluded to in the very beginning of this financial discussion, it's clear that the COVID work now has kind of postponed a lot of the work plan items here in 2020. But we're also willing to kind of step through. We have a PowerPoint presentation to kind of talk a little bit about this in detail. Obviously, the staff communications identified what's moving ahead, what's a priority. And I think tonight it's really just to affirm that this makes sense, that to proceed with this. And then ultimately, I'm looking for a decision whether or not you want to next week adopt goals and objectives, or if you feel that it's just in the city's best interest not to do that, since there's still so much unsettled decisions here relative to COVID-19 that we need to kind of postpone that formal adoption here, maybe sometime later this summer or fall. So that is my request, is to reaffirm, hopefully, that the work plan makes sense, and then ultimately tell me if you want to approve goals and objectives. But Samuel, why don't you step us through this PowerPoint to talk about the details?
Great. Well, you covered the introduction. This PowerPoint is going to go through each of our 3 goals, as well as touch on the additional items council had potentially to add here. So we're going to try to confirm those goals and objectives. We'll talk about the top priorities for each item and what's continuing here. And then we'll look for guidance on whether you want to look to adopt these goals and objectives next week. The first goal is Envision Littleton, Quality Community. It is to work with the community towards the common goals outlined in the comprehensive plan to promote a sense of discovery and connection, encouraging members of the community to express their beliefs and values, as well as build lasting relationships that can contribute to the overall success of the city. Objectives for this goal include the Unified Land Use Code, additional code enhancements that we've been working on for the past few years, as well as the Littleton Engineering Design Standards, commonly referred to as LEDs, and Economic Development Strategic Planning. Items that are identified as a top priority right now here are Unified Land Use Code and the Downtown Phase 1 and 2, which we have been working through. Other items continuing are the Criminal Code, floodplain code update, special districts, special events code, and the economic model. I do want to highlight here, we have a few completed items in this goal. We've got code updates for the fire ban and lien process that have both been completed. The areas of economic significance and phase 1 of the economic model have also been completed. At this point in time, I'm happy to pause. Are there any questions related to goal 1 or comments?
Keep on going, Sam.
All right.
I have a question. I don't know if she can see me.
And I raised my
Tama,
hand.
can you scroll back just one slide, Tama, for me, please?
So the goal and objective.
Yeah, thanks. Just in light of all this financial and economic fallout from COVID-19, what's the state, what's almost the use really of sort of the economic development, strategic planning, and the economic model? I mean, how do we do that in a way that makes sense in light of everything that's going on?
Well, I think the economic model is largely done. In fact, it may be completely done. So that's the tool that we were going to use here, so that when future development came to the city, that we'd have some way to kind of assess its impact to the city. So I think in the long run, that model still is going to be obviously valuable to us. I think the economic development strategy, that probably has been turned on its head. I think that it is now more likely that we're into kind of an economic recovery. And I think that's why I was floating this idea of a task force around that topic. So I think objective 4, the actual action steps are likely to change with that one based on current conditions.
Thanks.
Karina?
Yeah, let's see, what was my question? Next page, please.
Just a second. This one?
I totally forgot my question.
We can come back to it.
Taking advantage of that. Yeah, let's come back to it. Yeah. Keep going.
Okay. Ready to move to goal 2?
Yes.
All right, so financial sustainability is our goal 2. This is very similar to the financial sustainability goal we've had for the last 2 years. This is to develop a long-term sustainable financial plan for the city of Littleton by aligning available resources with community priorities in order to provide beneficial, meaningful, and valued services and programs while incorporating the necessary investment to maintain and develop value in our community assets. So our first objective is really priority-based budgeting here. So evaluating and prioritizing existing programs and services. Then we have evaluate fees for services, identify and assess and prioritize long-term capital needs, and then opportunities for potential funding. So top priorities identified here are priority-based budgeting in the 2021 budget process, and then the 2020 census, which is still ongoing right now. Other items that are continuing are the ADA transition plans, asset management implementation for the grounds division, sewer and storm rate studies, and the Santa Fe PEL process. I will highlight we have completed a couple of items on this goal as well. We've got the cost of service study under our boots. We've completed updating priority-based budgeting to align the results programs are scored on with the Envision Littleton work, the Vision Comp Plan and Transportation Master Plan. And we've completed the fiber optic master plan.
So Mayor, if I may just jump in.
Yes.
A couple of thoughts here. So the sewer and storm rate study, this is a good example of a couple of departments that are really not part of the sales tax concern. They're utilities, they're enterprise funds, so they operate independently of this. They are operating under user fees, and so that's one reason why they can continue. I still think it's very important for us to complete the rate work study. It's been far too long on the sewer for us to not do that work. We did get word from CDOT that the Santa Fe PEL process is going to continue. In fact, I think on the council's agenda for next week, there's maybe a IGA to approve to move that forward. So I think, in my opinion, these other items that are continuing are probably manageable, even under the current conditions.
Thank you. Sama?
All right, let me just get hold of my screen here and move back on. So our goal 3 is good governance. This is to be responsive, approachable, welcoming, fair, and accountable, internally and externally, to facilitate ongoing conversation that captures all considerations involved and ensuring interests are addressed and reflected in city policy initiatives. This includes items such as the high-performing organization work HR is doing, strategic communications, strategic partnerships, and technology strategic planning. Top priorities here remain track at 9. That's upgrading our system primarily used by community development. And then other items that are continuing on are updating the personnel rules and strategic partnerships, of course, modified for those that most meet the needs of the current situation. Any questions or anything to add here?
Continue on.
Seeing none. So moving on to Council's additional priorities, as Mark has said, these have had an impact with the COVID work. There's a lot of staff time being reallocated right now. However, we have completed some work on this and there are some items moving forward and we do want to highlight those for you. We've completed work for beautification of the city regarding median and landscape maintenance. We've completed a study there. We have a new online comment form to increase citizen engagement. Our Littleton Click and Fix, also known as C-Click Fix, has had a total revamp with internal processes and policies updated, as well as a dashboard that they're working to go live pretty shortly here. And we've updated the study session space, as you saw when we were still having meetings in person. Items that are progressing include community character and historic significance, which will be addressed in the Unified Land Use Code process, housing via the South Metro Housing Options Task Force, the preliminary project plan process, or P4 expansion, which is actually incorporated into phase 1 of the downtown updates. PBB expenditure and efficiency and effectiveness is of course at the front and center of what we're doing right now. We're also keenly aware of revenue options, and vaping is included in the criminal code update you'll see coming in front of you in May. Any questions or things to add for potential additions, Mark?
Not from my perspective.
All right, continue on.
So this is it. The key takeaways are just to remind the situation is dynamic. We'll be revisiting this work plan every month as we get new financial information. Flexibility is going to be very important here. And we'll plan to bring an update to council later this summer as to where the work plan sits.
Great. Karina, did you think of your question?
I didn't, but I have just an overall comment. To me, all of these goals are, they were just as important in a time of a good financial and economic situation, and even more so important to me, it seems, where we are now. So to me, I still feel these are absolutely key priorities, even at this time.
That's great. Pam.
Tell me if this is the time to talk about this. When we look at our list of things that we came up with in January, which now have to be pushed back, is now the time to talk about adding something or highlighting something? Or do you want to wait?
I think we better address what we already have on the table from January, because I know many of these things are being pushed back into, what was it, July and August, Sama? Is that what you have on the schedule I saw?
Yes. Yeah, we'll provide an update at that time.
So I think if we're going to add anything, we'll probably have to take something off, because I think what's already on there, it's going to be very difficult for staff to even get to that.
Oh, the only
but
thing,
if you have something, Pam, that's something that's important, you ought to bring it up. So go ahead.
yeah, the burning issue I have is short-term rentals. And maybe this is a question to ask. In the council work plan update, it was talking about kind of doing it by neighborhood basis. And that was concerning to me, to have kind of various rules about that. I realize it may not be a top priority, but I'd like to consider it down the road for this year. It's something we've been working on. It comes back to integrity of neighborhood. And I think eventually we'll come back, our community will come back, and I think that's something that we need to address.
Yes, and now Mark, short-term rentals, we don't have a date when we hope to get back to that?
No, this is the retreat specifically asked staff to kind of look at some options to maybe bring that forward sooner and not as part of the original plan for the neighborhood block. Unfortunately, we're just not in a position to do that now. And so we're suggesting that we do it as part of the original ULUC work. However, if there is a majority of councils wanting to have more of a discussion about that, my suggestion is we're just going to have to reassess this July-August timeframe and kind of see how that fits. I think that's going to give us a few months of getting this COVID-19 issue behind us, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more understanding of our real capacity at that point.
Yeah, I agree. Come August, we should have a whole new view of what's going on, what we have time to do, what we can do, what we can't do.
It's just
short-term rentals is going to be a big discussion.
Yeah, and if I'm sorry to interrupt there, but it's just from my view, it really is not possible to bring up the short-term rental sooner than certainly August. It's just there's just too much unknown here, and we can't really commit to that.
Understand.
Okay, and will the work plan then reflect that might be, right now the work plan just says it's going to be a neighborhood block of ULUC, but you're saying it's not going to be. Can we kind of update that to say that might be a July or August discussion?
I'm sorry, just to make sure I'm understood here correctly. What I'm saying is that we should leave it in the ULUC for the time being, come back and revisit the issue here in the July, August, just to kind of see where we're at for a capacity standpoint. If that's fair.
It's going to be a big discussion when we finally do get to it. That's for sure.
Thank you.
All right. Well, let's go around the horn if we're through with that item. Let's start with. Well, let's go ahead and. Are we through with that item first of all, Mark?
Yeah, and I think just maybe add a little bit more commentary here. I think the maybe adding to Karina's point here, the goals and objectives may still sound pretty on target. I think the action steps here on many of them probably are okay, but many of them, quite honestly, are just going to have to be revisited just under the current situation. Yeah. So even if you were to adopt next week, we're still going to have to come back as staff to kind of reassess the action steps here to make sure that we meet your desire.
Yeah. And I agree with Karina. They're all important to us one way or another. It's just whether or not it's practical that we'll have time and the ability to get to it. Karina?
And I think what this also does is, kind of relating back to our previous conversation, this helps set some of those priorities and decisions that we will have to make. So it gives a little bit more of that the guide to what do we cut, what do we continue to invest in, and what's not practical is just not practical. But this is another element of some of the guiding principles and priorities that help us make those decisions when we have to make those hard decisions.
And I think a lot of this is going to have to do when we do start ramping back into our new normal, as staff is able to start taking on more and more. But you're not going to just be able to do it right away. But I think Mark, correct me, I think you are going to be able to start taking on the smaller projects with staff as we start to ramp up again.
Absolutely. Yeah, believe me, we are anxious to move on from COVID-19.
Yeah. All right, Mark, do you have a report? Any updates?
I do not.
How about Reed? Do you have anything, City Attorney?
Nothing from the City Attorney's Office.
Okay. Council, do you have anything else you want to throw in there before we, Pam?
I'm unclear. What is the direction we're giving council? Are we giving staff? Are they going to come next week and ask us to adopt, or are we going to hold off based on the situation?
We're going to make a decision, I think, next week whether we're going to adopt or move it out. That's my understanding.
Well, if there is consensus this evening about what you want to do, that might be nice, Mayor, just to let me know. Otherwise, I can put it on the agenda and then you guys could vote it up or down. But I think tonight might be best.
Carol's got her hand up.
Yeah, Carol?
Could we have from staff, Mark, for next week a revised, reasonable calendar? I don't mean tentative calendar, but a set of when goals might be accomplished, something realistic now, so that we could decide to go ahead with the goals, but with realistic dates.
Yeah, almost like one of your Gantt charts, Mark, right? You're not going to be able to even look at it until August. That would address it.
Actually, in the staff communication, you do have a Gantt chart.
We have it.
I think Sam has done a pretty good job of trying to identify realistic milestones. There's also a whole handful of issues that we've just kind of identified that just have to be postponed until a July-August conversation. So I think realistic is an interesting challenge, Carol, at the moment.
Okay, how about if I change it to proposed? Proposed.
Better.
Because it sounds like what we have going forward right now is we either vote to go forward with unrealistic dates or we vote not to. I would like to go forward with dates that might be achievable.
Yeah, if you could just update the charts, Mark, that would be helpful.
We can certainly do that.
Scott?
I would just add, the work plan is not just about timelines, it's also about finances. And until we have the March revenue numbers in May 1st, I think we are missing critical information to be able to realistically say what our work plan should be. My very strong preference is that we put the items that came out of the retreat off until later. Staff's recommending July, August. That seems prudent to me. I think we've got a real emergency on our hands, and it's necessary that staff commit its time to being in triage mode. Mark mentioned in our council materials for the meeting, 90% of staff time right now is being taken up responding to issues raised by COVID-19. I think that's going to be the case for a while, and I don't want to overburden staff with anything that they can't be handled. I don't want to give the public unrealistic expectations about what council can achieve.
I agree, and I think if Mark updates the chart that you have with, we're going to go back and maybe look at it in August, but we're going to have to decide to adjust it or move it out to November, something like that. Because Scott's right, we don't, until August, we're not even know what our financial situation is. Karina, I know you're up, and then Pam.
I disagree. I think where I stand right now is what we're given direction on is what are the priorities for our city. As far as how we're going to be executing on, we may or may not know more in May, and we may or may not know more in August. But I think we're, based on resources of people or resources of money. But I think it is important that we give that direction of what is a priority. And then it's for Mark to continuously relook at what truly is possible. But that doesn't necessarily mean that these priorities change. That's a little bit of what I was alluding to earlier, is even in the economic situation that we're in now, these still sound like absolutely the right priorities, because they talk about financial sustainability. They talk about how we build up our community in the future. So those things, don't change now. And to a certain degree, I think they're even more important now, to make sure that once we start recovery, we're ready for that recovery to happen in a very deliberate, intentional way for our success. So while we may not know exactly what that timing of the work plan is, or what money we actually have to execute on all of these, I think the direction that these priorities are still the right priorities for a city, I think we should make that decision.
Well, I think they are priorities, and they're not going away. It's just that really over the next couple of months, and it is going to take till August financially to figure out where we are. And Mark may or may not even have staff to take that stuff on. That's why we can't just dump it on them and say, get this done. I think we do have to wait till August to see where we are financially, see where Mark is operational wise, and then we'll move on from there.
Ben, can I ask Mark to weigh in, to comment on this?
Sure.
Like what is the direction that you need from us, and how would you use this direction?
Yeah, I think if council was to adopt the goals and the objectives that's been identified that Sam kind of walked us through, and just adopted those, that's fine. Then staff has a responsibility to come back and share with you in July and August the action steps that are necessary, because as I said, many of them are going to change for obvious reasons. then the council can reaffirm at that point in time that that's the direction. I think I would probably add to Scott's comment where some of the other issues that were identified that at the end of the retreat that were kind of additional things we do need to set aside. There may be a couple of exceptions I can't remember offhand, but I think that work probably needs to be part of the July, August conversation to see if we have capacity to bring in.
Pam, I know wants to speak, and then Scott.
I think I'm leaning towards adopting these goals, knowing they may change, so you have some guidance to work from, as opposed to waiting until September for to Carol's point, maybe putting a little bit more realistic guidelines. To Karina's point, these are good goals. They give some overall direction. I think we'll all be realistic, as opposed to waiting till the fall to do them. And yes, agreeing with what Scott said, putting off, most of our desires for projects that were made under a different environment, and then revisit them in the summer. So
absolutely, yeah.
I'm leaning towards adoption.
Yeah, and Scott.
I guess maybe I just need some clarification from Mark. The items that Sam went over, I'm absolutely in support of those. I want to see those moving forward. Okay. If we have to adjust the calendar, great. I thought you wanted direction on the items that came out of the retreat. And those, I think, need to be pushed out.
That would have been helpful. Under normal circumstances, we would talk about those other items, but I guess I'm suggesting that we really don't have the time and capacity to deal with it under the current conditions, and that we do take those and set them aside and talk about them here late summer.
Right. Yeah. Patrick, would you like to chime in? He's on mute. There we go. Tyler, can you take it there?
No, I'm good there. No, I agree 100% with what Pam just said. I think we just had to get some clarification, as Scott just did. And I think Mark and I think we're on point.
Cool. Kelly, do you have anything you want to add?
I just want to say thanks to the staff for putting all that hard work into putting this together. And I know this is just semantics or whatever, but I see you have goals 1, 2, and 3. That's not the priority. They're not based on priority, right?
No.
Okay. Because obviously financial stability, I think, is priority number 1.
It certainly is.
Sustainability. So, yeah, and I would agree. I support adopting this.
Okay, so Mark, you have enough direction. I think you're going to adjust the schedule as B, but we're going to leave the goals in.
Yeah, very clear.
And they'll have to be we'll address them at some time in the near future. That could be August, but then we go from there.
Correct.
So
I have pretty clear direction.
Excellent. Council, anything else? Scott?
Just wanted to publicly congratulate Colleen on becoming the new city clerk.
Yeah, that's cool.
Couldn't be more excited for her. She's going to do a great job.
That's cool. All right. Well, with that, Council, let's go ahead and we're going to wrap it up. And if we're ready to adjourn, I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. The last chance. Okay. Well, with that, let's go ahead. I'm sorry.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
There's a lot of great. So the memo that comes out from Kelly has a lot of great information. I want to make a plug for the library and museum. They've really pivoted and have brought those services in a virtual setting. And right now there is at the museum, we have an exhibition that you can vote online for People's Choice. So please read Kelly's email on how to vote online and participate in that. So the more we build engagement internally, the more engagement we get externally. So that would be great if we can do that.
Great. Thank you very much. And with that, it is 7:58 and we are adjourned.